My boyfriend said on our wedding day he would come pick me with a very big Jeep that belonged to a rich man. How can that be possible when he is just a common bicycle repairer? I know, but I feel like even if he is poor, there is more I see in him than just a common bicycle boy. You're just in love, baby girl. Remember, love don't buy pepper.
Your big Jeep is here. Kindly enter the Jeep he promised you. Where is the big Jeep that wants to take you home on your wedding day? You think a Jeep is for the poor, like your so-called husband.
The heat in the heart of Umudioka village was the kind that slowed a man's pulse, thick with the scent of fermenting cassava and the bitter tang of roasting palm kernels. In the center of the village square, away from the bustling stalls where women haggled over the price of dried stockfish, stood a massive ancient ube tree. Under the sprawling shade of this tree was a world entirely dictated by the metallic rhythm of clinking spanners, hissing air pumps, and the scraping of iron. This was the domain of Obinna. To the passers-by, Obinna was just another struggling youth caught in the harsh web of rural poverty. He was the village bicycle repairer, a man whose hands were permanently stained with black engine grease and whose everyday attire consisted of a faded, threadbare singlet and a pair of trousers patched so many times it resembled a multicolored tapestry. His workshop was a modest affair, a makeshift canopy made of dried palm fronds and bamboo poles, under which sat old rims, tangled brick cables, and a collection of mismatched tools he had inherited from a retired kinsman. Day in and day out, Obinna labored under the humid sun. He would pump the flat tires of the local farmers' old Roadmaster bicycles, weld broken carriers, and oil rusted chains for a few crumpled naira notes. The village elders often looked at him with a mix of pity and indifference. In a society that measured a young man's worth by the size of his yam bands, the zinc roof on his father's compound, or his ability to throw lavish spending sprees at the local palm wine joint, Obinna was considered a man at the very bottom of the ladder. He lived alone at the fringes of the village in a small mud-walled hut that leaked whenever the August rains became too furious. Yet, despite the dust that constantly coated his skin and the poverty that seemed to define his existence, there was something undeniably peculiar about Obinna. He did not possess the frantic, desperate energy of a poor man trying to hustle his way out of hunger. Instead, he carried himself with a quiet, unsettling dignity. When he spoke, his voice was deep, measured, and calm, never raised in anger, never shaking with anxiety. While other young men lamented their lack of fortune at the village square, drinking local gin to forget their sorrows, Obinna would sit on his low wooden stool, carefully polishing a bicycle rim as though it were made of pure silver. He had an air of royalty about him that his ragged clothes could not entirely suppress, an unspoken confidence that made people look twice. He was in the village, but somehow he never truly seemed to be of the village. To the undiscerning eye, he was just a broke laborer mending chains in the dust, but destiny was quietly waiting in the wings, watching a prince play the part of a pauper. Olama was the kind of woman whose presence could silence a noisy marketplace. Her skin was the color of rich, untamed honey, polished to a soft glow by the palm kernel oil her grandmother prepared, and her eyes held the depth of a calm river. When she walked down the red dust pathways of Mudioka, heavy silver anklets around her slender ankles made a rhythmic clink-clink sound that drew the eyes of every young man and the envious glares of many maidens. She was the pride of her father's compound, a maiden whose hand in marriage was highly sought after. Young suitors from neighboring villages had begun frequenting her father's compound, their fathers trailing behind them with large foaming kegs of mbo, raffia palm wine, and heavy bags of cowries. There was Nana, the wealthy yam farmer, whose barns were so bursting that they required 3 extra laborers just to tend them. There was also Ikechukwu, the smooth-talking trader who had recently returned from the city of Onitsha, wearing shiny leather shoes and boasting about his newly built zinc-roofed house. Yet, to the absolute bewilderment of her family and the absolute mockery of her friends, Olama's heart remained firmly locked away from them all. It belonged entirely to the greasy bicycle repairer under the ube tree. Olama, are your eyes functioning properly at all? Her closest friend, Chika, had asked one afternoon as they walked back from the stream, balancing heavy clay pots of water on their heads. You are turning down men who can buy you the finest George wrappers, only to smile at a man whose daily income cannot even buy a healthy fowl? Love does not cook the evening soup, my friend. Her mother, too, would often sit her down in the kitchen, the smoke from the firewood stinging their eyes as she pleaded with her daughter. My child, beauty fades like a dried leaf. A woman needs a husband who can protect her from hunger, not one who will share his portion of lack with her. But Olama would only smile softly, her mind wandering back to the quiet moments she shared with Obinna. She knew he was poor. She saw the patches on his trousers and a leak in his thatch roof. Yet she chose to be with him because he gave her something no amount of yam bands or shiny city shoes could buy. Pure, unadulterated happiness. When she was with Obinna, the weight of the world lifted. He listened to her with a devotion that made her feel like the only woman on earth. He never pressured her, never boasted, and never treated her like a prize to be won. In his presence, she found a deep, unshakable peace. She wasn't looking for a savior with a full wallet. She was looking for a partner who made her soul sing. And in the dusty bicycle repairer, she had found her melody. As the shadows lengthened across Umudioka each evening, a cool breeze would sweep through the village, chasing away the oppressive heat of the day. It was during these quiet hours that Olama would slip away from her mother's compound to meet Obinna. Their sanctuary was a massive, ancient mango tree that stood on a small hill overlooking the valley, a place far enough from the village square to escape the prying eyes and wagging tongues of the gossips. Sitting on a smooth, weathered log beneath the heavy canopy of leaves, the harsh realities of their daily lives seemed to melt away. Obinna would arrive after a long day of labor, his hands freshly washed, though the faint scent of bicycle grease and palm oil always lingered on his skin. He would gently take Olama's hands in his own, looking at her with a gaze so fierce and devoted it made her breath catch. It was during these stolen moments that Obinna would speak of things that seemed entirely too large for their small world. Olama, my beautiful one, he would whisper, his voice carrying a deep, resonant gravity that echoed through the quiet night. Olama, I know what the village says about us. I know they laugh at you for walking by my side. But look at me. I have big dreams, and I promise you, I will surprise you one day. After our wedding, you will never know want again. We will live in a grand mansion, and you will walk on floors of pure gold. Olama would laugh heartily, a sweet musical sound that rippled through the branches above. She would lean her head against his steady shoulder, gently teasing him. Obinna, my king of words, if your dreams were yams, our barn would be the largest in all of Igbo land. I don't need a mansion, my love. Just mend your bicycles, make enough for our daily bread, and keep making me happy. That is more than enough for me. To Olama, these grand declarations were just the beautiful, ambitious musings of a young man deeply in love. A way for him to soothe his pride because he couldn't offer her the wealth her other suitors boasted of. She saw it as his coping mechanism, a harmless joke, or perhaps just a wild dream. What she did not know was that Obinna was not dreaming at all. He was testing her. as he looked at her laughing face, noting how she brushed off the promise of wealth without a hint of greed or bitterness. His heart swelled with immense satisfaction. She wasn't holding out for a mansion. She was completely content with his poverty so long as she had his heart. Olama was entirely unconcerned with his grand promises because her happiness was already fulfilled just by being with him. And in the shadows of the mango tree, Obinna knew without a shadow of a doubt that he had found a rare gem. The harmattan haze was beginning to settle over Amudioka, painting the mornings in shades of dusty grey when Obinna's family officially sent elders to Olama's father to pay the traditional bride price. It was a modest affair, just enough to satisfy the custom, with Obinna paying the small fee from his meager savings. The date for the Igbanku, the traditional wine-carrying ceremony, was set. As the village began to buzz with the news, the mockery reached a pitch. In the streams, at the local market, and during the meetings of the young maidens, Olama's friends spared no words in ridiculing her upcoming wedding. "A bicycle repairer's wedding?" they whispered, laughing behind their hands. "Instead of a canopy, they will probably sit under an old tire." A week before the grand day, Obinna walked to Olama's compound. The evening was cool, and they stood by the edge of her mother's vegetable garden, hidden from the main house by rows of tall waterleaf plants. Obinna's face was unusually solemn. His brow furrowed as he reached out to clasp her hands. "Olama, my love," he began, his voice laced with an earnest, heavy tone. "I know what the people of this village are saying. I know they expect you to walk to my mud hut on foot, with dust covering your bridal beads. But I want to give you face. I want to give your family pride." Olama looked at him, her heart softening. "Obinna, you don't have to prove anything to anybody. My heart is at peace." "No, hear me out," Obinna insisted, looking deeply into her eyes. "I have traveled to the neighboring town of Amanya. I spoke with a very wealthy merchant there, and he has agreed to lend me a very big car for our wedding day. It is a grand vehicle, the kind that kings and wealthy politicians ride in. I will use it to come pick you up from your father's compound and carry you home in grand style. Let the village see that you are marrying a man of substance." A bright, genuine smile erupted across Olama's face. Her heart leaped, not because she hungered for luxury, but because she knew how much this would silence the bitter tongues of her peers. It was a beautiful gesture of love from a man who had nothing but was willing to stretch himself to the limit just to make her proud. Unable to contain her excitement, Olama shared the news with her mother, her sisters, and her friends. "Obinna is borrowing a big car from Amanya," she told Chika the next morning at the village square, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. "He said it is a grand ride, fit for a queen. You all think he has nothing, but my husband is a man of honor. At least the entire village will see him drive me away in style." Chika only smirked, exchanging skeptical glances with the other girls. "We shall see, Olama. We shall see the kind of big car your bicycle repairer will bring." The morning of the Igbanku arrived in a spectacular burst of color and sound. The ancestral compound of Olama's father had been swept clean, the red earth packed tight by the thousands of feet arriving for the ceremony. Huge iron pots bubbled over open wood fires, filled with rich goat meat stew and pounded yam. The heavy, rhythmic thumping of the ogene, royal gongs, and the deep vibration of the igba, drums, reverberated through the air, drawing crowd after crowd from every corner of Umudioka. It was a beautiful celebration, but beneath the music, an undercurrent of intense curiosity rippled through the guests. Rumors of Olama's boast had spread like wildfire. Everyone, from the toothless elders sipping palm wine to the young maiden standing by the edge of the compound, was waiting to see the big car the poor bicycle repairer had supposedly borrowed. Inside the bride's chamber, Olama's heart hammered against her ribs, a mix of nervous excitement and pure joy.
When she finally stepped out, a collective gasp swept through the crowd. She was a vision of Igbo royalty. Her skin was oiled to a perfect sheen, and she wore a magnificent, heavy George wrapper tied tightly around her waist. Layers of genuine coral beads draped across her neck. Matching towering gele crowned her head. With a carved wooden cup filled to the brim with frothy palm wine handed to her by her father, Olama began her traditional search for her husband. She danced gracefully through the thick crowd, her hips swaying to the rhythm of the drums, her silver anklets singing with every step. She found Obinna sitting calmly among his small group of friends. He was dressed in a simple native top, looking remarkably at ease despite the massive crowd staring at him. Olama knelt before him, her eyes shining with love, and presented the cup. Obinna took it, looked deeply into her eyes with a mysterious, profound warmth, and drank every single drop. The crowd roared in approval. Gunshots of Otikuba fired into the air, signaling that the marriage was officially sealed. Then came the final, most anticipated moment of the day, the time for the groom to carry his bride away to his home. The drumming died down to a low, suspenseful murmur. The villagers moved out of the compound, lining the narrow village road, their eyes eagerly scanning the distance. Olama stood by the gate, her hands clasped tightly, her heart swelling with pride as she waited for the roaring engine of the grand vehicle her husband had promised. The silence that fell over the village road was so thick you could hear the rustle of the dry palm fronds in the breeze. Hundreds of eyes scanned the horizon, expecting a slick, roaring engine to pierce the dust of Mudioka. Then came the sound. It was not the smooth purr of a luxury car, nor was it the heavy rumble of a wealthy merchant's truck. It was a harsh, agonizing metallic screech. Screech, clack, screech. Through the clearing dust of the village gates walked Obinna. The festive native top he had worn during the wine carrying was gone. In its place, he wore a faded, sweat-stained shirt with patches at the elbows. He was not behind a steering wheel. His calloused hands were gripping two wooden handles, pushing a dented, heavily rusted, ancient wheelbarrow. Inside the rusted metal tray lay a single, dusty, threadbare throw pillow. For 3 seconds, the crowd stood in absolute paralyzed shock. And then, the explosion of laughter tore through the air. "Chai, Jehovah! Look at the big car!" Chika shrieked, clapping her hands together frantically before pointing at the wheelbarrow. "Olama, your big car has arrived. Come and enter your air-conditioned ride." "Hey, Obinna has killed us with laughter today," a welder elder shouted, wiping tears from his eyes. "So this is the machine from Amaya? Truly, a vehicle fit for a queen." The mockery spread like wildfire. The young men hooted, the women jeered, and children ran alongside the wheelbarrow, mimicking the screeching sound of its single, unoiled front wheel. Olama felt the blood drain from her face. A hot, suffocating wave of humiliation crashed over her, making her ears ring. She looked at her mother, who had quickly covered her face with her wrapper, weeping from the sheer shame of it. She looked at her father, who stared at the ground in grim silence. Her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Why? She thought, the tears finally spilling over her heavily made-up cheeks. If he had nothing, I would have walked with him proudly. Why did he make a fool out of me in front of the whole world? Obinna stopped right in front of her. He didn't look ashamed. He didn't look rattled by the deafening laughter of the village. He simply wiped the sweat from his brow, looked up into her tear-filled eyes, and extended his hand with a calm, royal grace that defied the rusty metal between them. "Olama, my love," he said, his voice steady and completely unbothered by the chaos around them.
The ride I promised is ready. Will you follow me home?" The laughter of the villagers felt like sharp needles pressing into Olama's skin. The jeers were deafening, a chaotic chorus of mockery that echoed from the walls of her father's compound down to the very core of her soul. "Step inside, Queen of the Wheelbarrow," Chika shouted from the crowd, her face twisted in a malicious grin. "Be careful not to tear your expensive wrapper on the rust." Olama stood frozen, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The heavy coral beads around her neck felt like iron chains choking her. She looked at the rusted wheelbarrow, then at her weeping mother, and finally she looked into Obina's eyes. She expected to see a smirk, a sign of a cruel joke, or perhaps the trembling shame of a man whose bluff had been brutally called. But she saw none of that. Obina's eyes were like deep, undisturbed pools of water. There was a profound, unshakable strength in his gaze, an unspoken plea that seemed to bypass the noise of the crowd and speak directly to her heart. "Do you trust me?" his eyes seemed to ask. "Do you truly love me for who I am?" In that split second, a fierce battle raged inside Olama. Pride screamed at her to turn around, run into her mother's hut, and call off the marriage. But her heart, the part of her that had found absolute peace under the mango tree, whispered a different truth. She had chosen this man when he had nothing. She had loved him when his pockets were empty. Wiping a stream of hot tears from her face, Olama drew a deep, shuddering breath. She silenced the mocking voices in her head. With a dignity that stunned the cheering crowd, she lifted the edges of her expensive, heavily embroidered bridal wrapper, stepped over the rusted metal frame, and sat down on the dusty throw pillow inside the wheelbarrow. The laughter died down for a brief moment, replaced by gasps of disbelief. No one actually expected her to do it. Obina smiled, a smile so radiant and full of triumph it seemed to illuminate the entire dusty road. He spat on his palms, gripped the wooden handles firmly, and lifted the wheelbarrow. "Hold on to me, my queen," he said softly. As he began to push her forward, the village erupted into a renewed frenzy of hooting and ironic clapping. Children danced around them, tossing dust into the air, while her friends shook their heads for pity and disgust. But Olama closed her eyes, held on to the rusty edges of the wheelbarrow, and kept her head held high. She had chosen her path, and she would walk, or rather, ride it to the very end. The mocking laughter of Umudioka slowly faded into the distance, replaced by the rhythmic, agonizing screech, clack, screech of the wheelbarrow's lone wheel. Olama kept her eyes closed for a long time, her heart heavy with the memory of her friend's pointing fingers. But as the minutes turned an hour, she noticed the rough, bumpy dirt track beneath them had changed. The wheelbarrow was now gliding smoothly over a pristine, black, asphalt-tarred road. Opening her eyes, Olama blinked in surprise. They were no longer on the path to Obina's leaking mud hut at the edge of her village. Instead, Obina was pushing her along the grand expressway leading into the elite, mysterious boundaries of the neighboring Amaya community, a land known throughout the region for its immense wealth and ancient nobility. "Obina," Olama whispered, her heart trembling as she looked around at the towering modern streetlights and manicured sidewalks. "Where are we going? This is not the way to your house. We are entering Amanya. We don't belong here." Obina did not say a word. He simply kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, a calm, focused smile playing on his lips as sweat glistened on his broad shoulders. He pushed her further into the wealthy district until they stopped directly in front of a sprawling, breathtaking estate that looked like it belonged to a legend. The estate was guarded by towering, massive gates made of pure, gleaming gold and intricate wrought iron.
high concrete walls topped with electric fencing and lined with majestic, swaying royal palm trees stretched as far as the eye could see. Olama's heart leapt into her throat. "Obina, please let us turn back," she pleaded, gripping the sides of the wheelbarrow tightly. "This is the estate of the high nobility. If the guards see us with this rusted wheelbarrow, they will think we are thieves. They will arrest us." But Obina did not turn back. With an unbothered, commanding stride, he pushed the wheelbarrow right up to the golden gates. Before Olama could scream for him to stop, the heavy golden gates instantly began to swing open with a smooth, mechanized hiss. A dozen heavily armed security guards and palace attendants dressed in crisp, immaculate ceremonial uniforms marched out. Olama stiffened, bracing herself for trouble. Instead, the guards stopped in perfect unison, snapped to attention, and bowed so low their foreheads nearly touched the paved ground. "Welcome home, my prince," their voices echoed across the estate in a thunderous, respectful roar. "Long live the prince." Olama's jaw dropped. She sat frozen in the rusted wheelbarrow, her eyes darting from the bowing guards to her husband, completely unable to comprehend the reality unfolding before her eyes. Obina did not stop at the gate. With the same steady, deliberate pace, he pushed the wheelbarrow down the long, smooth driveway. The path was paved with interlocking stones that gleamed under the afternoon sun, flanked on both sides by vibrant tropical flowers and perfectly manicured lawns. Olama's eyes darted frantically around the estate. She felt entirely out of place sitting in a rusted piece of construction equipment while surrounded by such breathtaking luxury. In the grand garage to their left sat a fleet of magnificent vehicles, a matte black Range Rover, a pristine white Mercedes-Benz, and a majestic Rolls-Royce bearing a royal crest on its wheels. Finally, Obina brought the wheelbarrow to a gentle halt right in front of the grand entrance of a towering 3-story mansion. The building was a masterpiece of modern architecture, featuring sweeping glass balconies, massive marble pillars, and water fountains that danced to a silent rhythm. Obina dropped the wooden handles of the wheelbarrow. The metallic clack echoed against the marble pillars. He walked to the side of the wheelbarrow, bent down, and gently lifted Olama out, setting her feet firmly on the polished marble floor of the porch. The moment her feet touched the ground, the dam broke. Olama burst into uncontrollable tears. The emotional whiplash of the day, the burning humiliation at the village square, the long ride in the dust, and now this overwhelming, confusing display of wealth shook her to her very core. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders heaving as she wept bitterly. "Obina, what is the meaning of this?" she cried, her voice cracking with a mixture of confusion and pain. "What kind of cruel game is this? I loved you when you had nothing. I stood by you, but today I almost gave up on your dreams at the village square. I thought you had completely ruined my life and made a mockery of my love in front of everyone I know. Why are we here? Whose house is this?" Obina stepped closer, his grease-stained hands gently wrapping around her waist. He pulled her close to his chest, allowing her to weep against his shoulder until her breathing slowed. Gently, he lifted her chin so she was forced to look into his eyes. "Forgive me, my beautiful queen," he said, his voice no longer carrying the tone of a humble village mechanic, but rather a deep, commanding resonance that demanded absolute reverence. "I am not Obina, the bicycle repairer. I am Prince Obinaya, the sole heir to the ancient throne of the Amanya kingdom." Olama gasped, her breath catching in her throat as her eyes widened in sheer disbelief. "My father, the king, passed away 2 years ago," Obina explained softly, rubbing his thumb against her cheek to dry her tears. "According to our sacred tradition, I cannot be crowned king unless I am married. When the news of my father's passing came, women from all over the country flocked to the palace, all of them desperate to wear the crown and live in this mansion. But I did not want a woman who loved my title, my money, or my cars. I wanted a woman who loved Obinna, the man. I needed a true queen who could look past poverty, look past a leaking roof, and see a human soul worth loving.
Everything I promised you under the mango tree is real. It is all yours. You passed the ultimate test, Olama. Today, you chose me when I gave you a rusted wheelbarrow, and because of your faith, you will walk on gold for the rest of your life. The following week, the atmosphere across the entire clan shifted from mockery to absolute awe. The sound of the ojene, the royal iron gongs, shook the land, carrying the heavy, rhythmic announcement from the Amanya Palace. The mourning period for the late king was officially over, and the coronation of the new king, His Royal Majesty King Obinaya, was at hand. Beside him, to be crowned the supreme queen of the kingdom was Olama, the humble girl from Umudioka. Olama personally made sure that royal gold-embossed invitations were delivered back to her village. She specifically commanded the palace messengers to hand-deliver them to Chika and all the fair-weather friends and family members who had laughed at her while she sat in the rusted wheelbarrow. On the day of the coronation, the Amanya Palace grounds were a sight of unrivaled grandeur. High chiefs, governors, and kings from neighboring communities arrived in long convoys of luxury cars. The air was thick with the aroma of choice delicacies and the sound of royal traditional dancers. Seated high upon a magnificent golden throne sat King Obinaya, looking breathtakingly majestic in his heavy royal robes, holding his staff of office. Beside him sat Queen Olama, looking like a goddess in her royal coral beads, a crown of pure gold resting perfectly upon her head. When Chika and the village mockers walked into the grand palace hall, their knees literally shook. Their eyes nearly fell out of their sockets as they looked at the poor bicycle repairer they had ridiculed just days before. He was no longer covered in grease. He was radiating power, wealth, and authority. Olama looked down from her high throne, catching Chika's terrified, embarrassed gaze. Instead of anger, the queen simply smiled with royal grace. She signaled the palace attendants to serve them the most expensive wines and finest food. It was at that very moment the villagers wept in regret, realizing that the man they had mocked was a lion who had only chosen to walk like a goat, and Olama's blind faith and pure love had made her the most powerful queen in the land. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much for reading and watching this beautiful story of faith, love, and patience. If you enjoyed how Olama's humility turned her from a village mockery into a royal queen, please like this video and subscribe to our channel right now. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you will never miss any other interesting, moral, and captivating stories like this from this channel. Drop a comment below telling us what you learned from Olama and Obinna's story. See you in the next video.